which was you cannot change education without touching the financial system, the resources, the physical space, the investment, the salaries that you pay to teachers, how to invest in technology, what is the return. I think the idea of plagiarism, the idea of cheating is not the right discussion. I think what we need to do is change the way we assess knowledge, change from, we used to teach how to do things, and that was part of the agricultural era. We used to teach, what to do, part of the industrial era, what formula, what you needed to memorize. And now we need to teach why. We need to focus much more on the purpose. We need to focus much more on the know who is doing things different, who's inventing, who's accelerating. And then in the know-how is how can you become more human and then use technology to extend it. By basically saying you need to learn to understand this context, you need to learn how to learn for the rest of your life, and then you need to act on that learning. Those would be the right ideas to design or redesign the transformation in education. We need to think about not a university, but a multiversity. A multiversity is a place where you have multiple certificates throughout multiple stages of your life, multiple segments, multiple generations, and multiple journeys. All of that is already existing, but it's it's singled out as a university.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Future Hacker. I'm your host, Maria Taide, and today we're discussing the future of education, especially in Latam, with Fernando Valenzuela. He's a thought leader and a consultant who specializes in educational technology. He's also the co-founder of the Global Impact EdTech Alliance, a mentoring organization, and Latam Alliance, a network of Latin American educational innovators. He was recently named a Global Visionary of the Year in 2022 by EdTech Digest. Hi, Fernando. How are you? It's so great to have you with us today.
Hello, Maria. Very, very happy to be with your audience. So very excited.
Education is always a very, very dear topic of mine. It doesn't matter what we are talking about here in Future Hacker, it always ends up going back to the topic of education somehow, But, let's begin by the beginning. Let's explore your venture into the educational sector, your encounters while residing in so many countries that you did, leading to the co-founding of the Global Impact EdTech Alliance. What motivated your entry into this field, and were there any particular moments or experiences that influenced your professional perspective?
Yeah, so it's been a long journey. So I started in the technology sector, and by doing that, I was already connected with education because I was kind of in the leading edge of technology, kind of in the late 80s, working for companies like Hewlett-Packard and EDS, some of the companies that were kind of ahead of everything that was happening in technology. And that's how I initially got connected, by teaching and by being part of the faculty in many universities. I also got the chance to live in many different countries. So I lived in Brazil, I lived in Colombia, in the US, and in Mexico. So I had this regional perspective, always thinking about the challenges of Latin America and how Latin America was particularly behind in education. So around 2009, one of my ex-bosses at Hewlett-Packard told me, the next digital transformation has to happen in education. And I was so convinced about that I started monitoring the industry of education, the technology in education. In 2009, 2010, there was not a concept of EdTech, even though education in technology has been sort of there forever, but there was not an industry of entrepreneurs in education. It was really very concentrated. You could see that only 5 companies were above $1 billion in the world. And all of these companies, or most of these companies, were the textbook publishers. and there was only one technology company at that time. And then from those big companies down, there was a big space. And that's where I got the opportunity. So I joined as president for Latin America for the very large publishers, McGraw-Hill, Cengage Learning. And that's how I said, the digital transformation has to come from outside, has to come from entrepreneurs. And so I started kind of promoting, parents that were not satisfied with education, students, teachers, investors, and saying we need to build this idea of edupreneurs. And to make this very long story shorter, so I ended up working in about 6 acquisitions for Cengage, 2 more for McGraw-Hill, and then I realized that the industry was beginning to happen.
I find your journey fascinating because you were able to experience this amazing evolution in an industry that it was. We know that many industries are being impacted by new technologies, but when you talk about education and all the cultural differences and all the differences in new generation and how people consume content and how people are learning today against how we did a couple of decades ago. And regardless of the topic at hand, we always find ourselves delving into the meaning of education and the necessity for this revamped system to address all the new forms of content consumption, all the learning expectations of the newer generations. So, given this amazing experience of yours, have you observed any substantial changes? Or do you feel we're still clinging on traditional methods? And how do we propel the system forward in the face of those shifts? I find it interesting that you just mentioned how you believe that changes have to come from the outside and from those edupreneurs, right? But is this enough to change a whole system?
Well, yes, I think one of the key ideas here is that, when I started looking at education, there were significant changes happening in some of the pedagogical discussions. So one of the things that I realized was that, the role of the teacher, the role of the student, new pedagogies for more active learning were beginning to happen. And in that sense, what I found is that the people that were involved in these changes, in these new pedagogies, were not involved in the technologies. It was kind of a broken bridge. People that understood technology did not know how to use technology for these new kind of learning scenarios. That people that were trying to change the pedagogies were very distant from technology. And that was my first realization, to begin building this bridge, because in the end, you're using technology to enrich a very human experience. Sort of like mentoring, like not only content consumption, but also how you experience the relationship with others. What is your role in your own learning? So that was the initial connection, the initial bridge. But then after a couple of years, I realized that was not even enough, because in order for you to take advantage of the new pedagogies and the new technologies to expand those, you needed to change the capital, resource allocation, budgeting, and the whole financing of education. And that was a big realization as well, because then I needed to build another bridge, which was, you cannot change education without touching the financial system, the resources, the physical space, the investment, the salaries that you pay to teachers, how to invest in technology, what is the return. I ended up building a methodology of returns, because it's not only return on education versus return on investment. You needed additional returns, the return on time, return on information, return on trust, return on impact. And the final bridge, then I had these 3 bridges. I was beginning to connect the community of new pedagogies with the community of new technologies and the community of financing, budget, resource allocation, architects, and physical space. And then I realized there was another missing bridge. And this was the impact bridge. Because now we can use these three previous combination of pedagogy, technology, and resources to impact millions of people. So this idea that you only have a school that is of this size because you only have this amount of seats and classrooms is totally outdated. And then I realized that now education can finally close gaps for millions. And that was kind of the last bridge. So pedagogy, technology, capital, and impact, they need to merge in order to do this transformation.
I absolutely love this rationale, and of course it makes a lot of sense, but I can see also the size of the challenge, right? Of doing something like that. And I can see that thinking about the private sector world. So taking this even to the government sphere, to the public sphere, it's almost sound like a mission impossible. So when you got into this whole journey, did you begin it by trying this effort on a private sphere, or were you also able to somehow involve the public one?
So for Latin America, I see that this is very, very painful when you look at the public sector in the region. I started initially by looking at countries, the initial incubators, accelerators, the initial edupreneurs that I found them in places like Israel, like the UK, like Japan, Singapore, and the Nordics. Those were the countries that in 2009, 10, 11, they were doing something. And the common thing about them was that there was a big connection between the public and the private sector. Even in some of these countries, what happens is the public sector sets up the agenda of transformation, the goals, what they want to accomplish, and then you have the traditional universities and the entrepreneurs kind of working together to solve these challenges. So there was a big connection between private and public to do this. When you get to Latin America, it's really, really painful. It's only in the private sector that you see a little bit of that. When you speak about the public sector, they either have too much of a close boundary in terms of how they can shift funding from one place to the next, or they have political commitments, or they have so much, reduced time because a new governor or a new municipality comes in and they only have 4 years or 5 years, and then the new one comes in and breaks everything. So there is no continuity. So it's been very, very painful to see this in the region. I think it's a private-public collaboration. I think it requires much more than the big players, because you can see now governments trying to do something in the digital transformation sphere, but they only look at companies that are able to sustain and have the resilience to deal with governments that would probably, eat up a lot of resources and don't pay in time, or they want things for free for a number of years, and large pilots without being paid, and so on. So I think this is one of the key challenges in Latin America, doing the right public and private collaboration.
And I would even get a little deeper into that, Fernando. When we say private versus public and this collaboration, I see that not only the educational institutes and initiatives and schools and universities, but also companies and associations and organizations, especially because it should be any company's very first interest to be able to qualify people, to educate people so they can actually be competitive in the market, which is a big pain here as well, right? Do you have any good cases about that? A real collaboration between all the spheres, or is like a work in progress?
Yeah, I would say there are a few selections. I think countries like Uruguay with Plan Ceibal, which created this entity with enough autonomy and enough kind of freedom to move around the digital technology. There's a little bit in Costa Rica. So some of these small countries, in the region are able to do that. I think this idea of creating a somewhat in the middle type of organization like Plan Ceibal has proven to be very successful in how they integrate a long-term vision, digital technology, and so on. One of the things that I realized early on is the amount of money that God gets into education from foundations, NGOs, corporate social responsibility, volunteers. There's a lot of causes around education. There's a lot of money in the non-profit sector that goes to education. The problem is that it's invested and it's dedicated in places where they cannot maximize impact. So you have, a number of companies that would have an education effort and they would go and, paint a school or help, give some of these classes. And there, when you look at the amount of money, both publicly and in the corporate level, in the corporate social responsibility level, you realize that it's more a problem of how it's allocated and how it creates impact than looking for more money. I think everybody's conscious about education, but the way they apply this is either through initiatives that would not maximize impact, would have a very reduced, sustainability in terms of time. So it ends up, losing all of that impetus. So I think we have a great opportunity just to rethink that, to be willing to enter this technology. I did one project in Mexico with a few friends. It was no more than 6 or 7 of us, that we went to find the most vulnerable school that we could. And we found it in a municipality in Oaxaca, which is one of the poorest states. It's a community that is totally lost, very far away from any city. They don't even speak Spanish. They have very little access. And what we decided to do is try to test how they would respond to top-line technology, infrastructure, training. So we put the connectivity antenna from Starlink. We brought one of the best content solutions. We provided training. We worked with the community, and we demonstrated that in a small community, only 6 people could make it happen for 250 communities and families in the most vulnerable areas. So in many senses, this is not a limitation of connectivity. This is not a limitation of budgeting. This is just resource allocation and collaboration between private and public. That would be kind of the message, I think.
Yeah. And it's, in a way, I even find it somehow optimistic, just to know that the resources are there. We just need to be smarter regarding using it. For me, somehow it's better, right? Than not having them at all. Okay, so I have so many topics to discuss with you, Fernando. So I'd like to discuss specifically about how do you see the industry and the educational industry specifically responding to the artificial intelligence use and the challenges about, teaching what really matters, like being able to question the sources, media literacy, databases, the use of the right databases, the logic behind it, ethics, bias, against also the plagiarism battle, right? So how do you perceive the institutions addressing this?
Yeah, I think first it came as a big shock to the system. So let's remember that when artificial intelligence in the name of ChatGPT got to every single home in the world pretty rapidly, people were just coming back from the COVID pandemic and just trying to realize that what they did in moving to digital education was not exactly digital transformation. It was just a digital emergency where they tried to replicate what was happening. So within that shock comes another shock, which is now artificial intelligence is in the hands of everybody, and it has many different dimensions. So this, in order to respond to you, Maria, I think we need to look at many different dimensions. One of which has to do with some of the lessons of what happened during the pandemic, which was that education realized how much importance had the emotional status and the emotional well-being of not only students but also teachers. So including the emotional impact in education was not something that was done. The second aspect also in that dimension has to do with the fact that you don't only think about education anymore as a stage in your life. You used to learn and then work, right? Now it has to be all connected. So when artificial intelligence began to hit, the first thing that happened and I'm sure you saw all of these news, saying that the end of humanity was coming, that all of this negativity, saying what are we gonna do? New York City is banning because of the cheating and the chatbots, and what are we gonna do? Plagiarism, and students are cheating, and everything had to do with trying to block, as everybody remembers that the same thing happened when calculators began to hit in the market. You see these math teachers protesting against calculators. But in reality, I think that what happens now is that artificial intelligence and the whole digital scenario is here to stay. And it's not only artificial intelligence, it's going to be a collision of technology. So when you put artificial intelligence with augmented reality, with gaming, with data analytics, what happens, and the way artificial intelligence beats the education system, is because it doesn't have these fake compartments. It doesn't have this idea that the faculty of science does not speak with the faculty of art or the faculty of humanities. And you see that everything in education had its own compartment. So when you put artificial intelligence and connects data all over the place, you can see that industries have a lot of commonality. You can see that the humanities, the arts, the oil industry and the fruit and food industry and the electronic industry begin to have kind of commonalities, because data now has no boundaries, has not these fake faculties. The buildings are totally separate. And I think that was one of the initial challenges. I think the idea of plagiarism, the idea of cheating, is not the right discussion. I think what we need to do is change the way we assess knowledge, change from, we used to teach how to do things, and that was part of the agricultural era. We used to teach, what to do, part of the industrial era, what formula, what you needed to memorize. And now we need to teach why. We need to focus much more on the purpose. We need to focus much more on the who is doing things different, who is inventing, who's accelerating. And then in the know-how is how can you become more human and then use technology to extend. And let me just close with the biases and the concerns. Everybody says, artificial intelligence can be mistaken. There is a lot of data that is not true. It can hallucinate and all of that. But I always say that it also reflects the data that we created. It reflects data from the past.
Yep.
So it means that our teachers also hallucinate, also have biases, also have, significant behaviors that would probably favor men over women, would probably favor some other biases that you only see them consolidated in data. So when you close the classroom and it happens in one teacher, they could also make mistakes, and all of that can happen. So I think we need to be more optimistic. We also need to be aware of the concerns and the ethical. We need to regulate in the sense that you would create like a legal boundary between. I always say, like, if you have two lawyers and one lawyer is totally aware of what is happening around the world and the other lawyer has only worked in one area of law, then the lawyer that is more connected would always win. That's what happens with artificial intelligence. It's like you would be the lawyer that only knows a little bit, and you're against the lawyer that owns a lot.
But Fernando, I think that the challenge here is that how not to turn all those bias that are already here, and they have been forever, and actually in the past were much worse and much more cruel than they are today, right? But into something exponential. Because if we decide to stop thinking about it and just make something that we develop in a way that is not going to improve or make it better, how to avoid going into a way that all the negative sides are going to be exponential, which makes me want to go to my next question, which is, as you were mentioning before, traditionally soft skills like critical thinking, adaptability, they weren't really encouraged in schools, right? And neither we had spaces which would allow us to make errors and try again. We had this system that we had to memorize, to accept whatever the teacher was saying and whatever was written on the books. And so to that, are we making the necessary changes? I do know a couple of initiatives, but very few, and we did cover those in the media literacy roundtable that we did a couple of months ago. But how do you see those changes taking place?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I think in every single education system, in every country in Latin America, you see these sweet spots. You see a few examples that are doing this correctly. The problem is of scalability and maximizing impact. I think one of the keys, when you mention the exponentiality of this transformation, I think what we need to do in education, and this is to my friend Gary Bowles from Singularity, you need to think about the mindset, the skill set, and the tool set that you need. Those three dimensions, I think, would be my initial approach. So what is the right mindset of all of these leaders in education? What are the skills that they need to develop? Because we used to think that if you work in education, think about the head of a school, the head of a university, they only look within themselves, right? They think that they know it all because they have the teachers, because education hasn't changed. So they need to transform themselves from a leadership perspective, from being the folks that know it all or have access to knowledge, to the ones that have to learn it all. And they are always trying to find the one single silver bullet to say, we need to train teachers on this technology. We need to train students using this platform. And that only lasts for a few months because technology is always changing very rapidly. So I would say that you need to think about developing this idea of, designing futures, which is a new area of discipline where you need to see the signals of the future, develop the scenarios, and then build the tools or think about the tools that you're going to need for those scenarios. You need to think about this mindset, skill set, tool set, and you need to learn much more from people than from books or from the past. Putting all of this together, it basically says the things that you need to teach are how to understand the context, how to interpret the context, and then what to do about it. So the way we close on that is by basically saying you need to learn to understand this context, you need to learn how to learn for the rest of your life, and then you need to act on that learning. Those would be the right ideas to design or redesign the transformation in education.
Perfect, Fernando. Thinking about education in other regions, and for sure you are very aware of really good initiatives out there. Are there any particular challenges that you find unique to Latin America that we should delve into, especially concerning the adoption of technology, the integration into the global market? And especially my concern is how can we vision a viable pathway to enhance our competitiveness and readiness for the future in these aspects? How can we actually position as a region that will be able to address even the future of work?
Yeah, so I see Latin America has a number of unique characteristics, one of which is the young population. We are typically, and we are about to lose that advantage, but we are typically a younger, country, a younger nation, younger region. One of the things that is happening around the world, and we found this in the Nordic countries, in Finland specifically, is that they started to question the value of experience, right? Experience used to be the best thing that you could have to add value to a business. Today, experience can be a liability. And then you have some challenges that are so unprecedented that if you address those challenges with experience, you're also going to have a bias and you're going to miss on that. So what is happening is that they are bringing business value from people without experience to solve these unprecedented challenges. That could be a significant advantage for our region to understand this idea and to have young population, young students being able to connect to business value in a different way. The other element that I want to reflect on is this idea of, the collaboration that is needed in multiple generations. I think we need to break this mold that we are in school, but everybody in the same cohort comes from the same level of social economical backgrounds. They are from the same age. They sort of think alike. And then we need to think about how do we build from collaboration among the differences, collaboration among different generations, different social backgrounds, different ideas. And that, I think, Latin America has so much diversity that if we think about designing collaboration, not among people that think alike or people that are from the same generation, but collaboration among these differences, that could also be a big idea. If you look at the entertainment sector, Maria, I'm sure you know, because Brazil is one of the top. You look at the gaming, you look at the social media strategies, and you always see that for these big gaming companies and for these big social media companies, you always see that Latin America is strategic. Latin America is a very large market. Young people are engaged with these games, with social media. They spend more hours on average than in any other region in the world. And then I think, what if we match that with education? What if we only had the same level of engagement that entertainment and gaming had in Latin America, and we do that from education?
Wonderful. Fernando, now covering another topic that is very dear to me, which I mentioned before, which is media literacy, right? And its critical role in combating misinformation, ensuring a safe use of digital technology for all, and even considering these are rights, as it was discussed in the roundtable that we did. Are there any educational institutes addressing it, as well as governments including it in the basic education system? I've seen a couple of, again, isolated initiatives, and it's such an important topic, and not only for the youth, like for all generations. And I know that currently it's a big problem also for the older generation, which they're really being bad damaged because they just don't know they are used to trusting whatever they see, right? So what's your view on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think this idea of media literacy, it should be approached as a social transformation effort. It needs to be very well managed as a movement, because I think there's a lack of awareness of all of these dimensions and what it brings when you don't have kind of a better society. So I would say it's very close to this social transformation movement, to the civic engagement that is required. So I think the idea of media literacy, it has to come from understanding that the impact that it has, it has the dimension of transforming the society. So when we look at that, it cannot be far away from any education system. So the idea of creating a media literacy portfolio or a media literacy curricula, I think it should be, along with what I just mentioned in terms of designing futures and so on, you need to build that in communication, in capacity building, having these examples of what it can do to the students and also to the parents. I think the only way to address the challenges is to bridge students, parents, and teachers. I think this is one of these areas where everybody needs to participate. So I would not put it in a responsibility only for the education system. I think the engagement of parents. So if I was to design a media literacy, let's call it a media literacy strategy for schools, I would use it in a conversation between parents, teachers, and students at the same level, because sometimes you have the students that have the examples, but the parents are not aware, so therefore you don't have the bullying consciousness that the students have, because it doesn't reach parents or teachers, because it doesn't happen in the classroom, in the education setting, or in the family. So you need to bring that digital concern back home. So I'll say this is one of the key elements. I also see a few examples. I know of an organization that has created a digital media product that is helping education, and I know companies like Google are supporting that, and some others, but still it needs to be mainstream.
I like that you brought up the use of the media literacy and the issue of bullying prevention. For the audience that is interested, we also have an episode just about bullying and the impact of technology and what we should do about it. The name, I think, if I'm not wrong, is the loneliness epidemic, I think. It's on our YouTube page with Benjamin Horta. So it's a great reference on bullying here in Brazil. So Fernando, we are almost running out of time, and I have a very a last question to you that is very important as well. And so, do you have any insights regarding global trends, innovations in educational technology? So, what should we expect in the coming decades?
Yeah, so I'm gonna refer to you some of these concepts. I was hired to do a report last year for UNESCO Higher Education Summit in Barcelona. This is a meeting that happens every 10 years or so, and it was the idea of looking at the futures of higher education. And we started by looking about what is happening in social media that the universities are not aware of. What is it that is you could listen to your students, listen to your community, understand their needs, understand their aspirations and their concerns by connecting to that world. So one of the things is breaking these boundaries from universities. The second element also has to do with breaking a little bit the boundary between the formal presence, digital presence of an institution and the formal digital presence of the people that make this institution. So the president of a university, the teacher, the head of the faculty, typically they have very limited social media presence, social media impact. So what happens is more and more students are having these behaviors in social media, and less executives, leaders in education are part of that conversation. So we need to break that part. So that was one of the elements. Second is the space that these universities could take is not only, what good of a campus you have, what good of a faculty you have, how many graduates had made it successfully in the business scenario, but now you need to think about, how do you do this mind fusion with technology? How do you create entrepreneurs, but not only from a business perspective, but entrepreneurs in science, entrepreneurs in arts, in humanities? Then what is it that you can engage? How do you can engage this learning? How you can create these active methods of learning? How do you balance the data with the emotion, and how you create this connection between others so you learn more from people? So that was another dimension. Think about the physical space. And again, we did an exercise with Rosanne Bosch looking at jails and prisons around the world, and we ended up with this conclusion that probably the same architect that designed the prisons and jails is the same that designed the universities and schools, because they look so very similar. So the physical space needs to create a different environment, needs to also be a part of connecting, collaborating, and so you have this concept of phygital, a little bit of physical, a little bit of digital, but all blended. And so two more concepts there, Maria. One is that we need to think about not a university, but a multiversity. A multiversity is a place where you have multiple certificates throughout multiple stages of your life, multiple segments, multiple generations, and multiple journeys. All of that is already existing, but it's kind of it's singled out as a university. So we designed a metaphor to say what the future of education should look like, and we used the subway of London, the famous tube of London, to say if you spend a week in London or you live in London, there is no way that you're gonna not use the subway for any reason. So this is how education should be thought of. You enter the subway in the station that is closest to where you are. You enter education at the stage that is closer to where you are, and then you move to your next destination. Sometimes, in order for you to move to your next destination, you take the red line from beginning to end. But sometimes you only take 2 stations and you cross from the red line to the blue line, and you go 2 more stations. Every station is a skill, is a mindset, is a tool set that you are achieving, but it doesn't mean that you get to your destination. So this idea of eradicating graduation because you never end this learning, I think is very, very powerful. So from there, we developed a strategy to think about lifelong learning. What does it mean? So it has many different principles. We probably don't have time to go through that, but lifelong learning is confused by taking a course after you graduate. Lifelong learning is a mindset, it's a curiosity, it's a way of connecting with other people that you're always learning, and it's very dynamic. So it has a number of elements. So those would be the type of reflections that I would bring to discuss the future of education.
I'm so happy you were here with us today. Such a rich discussion, really great content. I feel very thankful. And if you have any final note, any final advice for our listeners, I'm leaving the last words for you. And everybody, thanks so much for listening. Make sure you follow us on our YouTube channel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Looking forward to continue this. Just one last message. We need not to forget that we need to become more human. Let me just a quick example. There is a library in Denmark called the Human Library, where instead of renting a book, you rent a person. And you may rent a person that has anorexia, and then you have to discuss how that person with anorexia is dealing with that. So that sort of example, I think we need to also create a different humanity. So thank you for the invitation.
Future Hacker. Life. Path. Future.